This tutorial is for 3rd grade, Module 2, Lesson 13b. In this lesson, we're going to continue rounding numbers on the vertical number line. The directions say to round to the nearest 10 and use the number line to model your thinking. I have the number 132. I'm going to round it to the nearest 10. So we need to figure out how many tens that is. Well, a couple different ways you can look at this. When I'm counting by tens, eventually I would get to, let's say, the number 90. So I would count 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, 140. So 132 falls between 130 and 140. Another way you can look at that is 130 is the same thing as 13 tens, because there's 10 tens in 100 and 3 more tens. And 140 is the same thing as 14 tens. So when we're rounding to the nearest 10, we need to make sure that we're putting numbers that are showing the number of tens we have. The next step is to plot the midpoint. Halfway between 130 and 140 would be 135. Because if you remember, halfway between 30 and 40 is 35. So we can use that pattern to help us find the midpoint between 130 and 140. So we have our two answer choices and we have our midpoint. The next step is to actually plot the number on the number line. I have 132. Well, it's going to fall between 130 and 135. I'll put that on my number line. Since 132 falls below the midpoint, when we round it to the nearest 10, we will round down. That means 132 rounded to the nearest 10 equals 130. Let's look at problem B. Now we have the number 366. We're still rounding to the nearest 10. So I can think of 366 as having 36 tens, or 360. That would be my lower answer choice. The next answer choice would be 37 tens, or 370. The midpoint between 360 and 370 is 365. Now let's place 366 on the number line, about here. Since 366 falls above the midpoint, we will round it up to 370. So 366 rounded to the nearest 10 is 370. We'll follow the same process for these problems. Now I have 262. I'm still rounding it to the nearest 10. Well, 262 means that I have 26 tens, or 260. The next group of tens would be 27 tens, or 270. The midpoint between 260 and 270 is 265. Now let's place 262 on the number line, about here. Since it falls below the midpoint, we will round it down. 262 rounded to the nearest 10 is 260. And now I have 198. Well, 198 means I have 19 tens, or 190. If I add one more group of tens onto that, I would have 20 tens, or 200. The midpoint between 190 and 200 is 195. Let's place 198 on the number line, about here. Since 198 falls above the midpoint, we will round that up. That means that 198 rounded to the nearest 10 is 200. In the next section, we have some objects, and we're going to use number lines to round those objects to the nearest 10 grams. To start with, I have a bag of candy and it weighs 766 grams. The number 766 has 76 tens. So we'll start our number line there. 76 tens is the same as 760. 10 more than that would be 770. The midpoint between 760 and 770 is 765. Now let's show 766 on the number line about here, and that would round up to 770. That means 766 grams rounded to the nearest 10 would be 770 grams. Next we have a roll of quarters that weighs 829 grams. Well, 829 would have 82 tens. So we'll start our number line there. 82 tens is the same as 820. 10 more added on to that would be 830. The midpoint would be 825. Now let's show 829 on the number line, just below 830. And since it's above the midpoint, we'll round that up. That means 829 grams rounded to the nearest 10 equals 830 grams. And my last problem shows a football that weighs 439 grams. The number 439 has 43 tens in it. That will be my bottom number. 43 tens is 430. 10 more than that is 440. The midpoint is 435. Let's place 439 on the number line. And since that falls above the midpoint, we're going to round up. That means that 439 grams rounded to the nearest 10 equals 440 grams.